There are so many things about mental health that can impact how a person performs, what their quality of work is, what their quantity of work is, how they interact and with a team, how they either produce or bring a team down. So it really is important that we have this conversation. Well over 50% of people in the United States have anxiety, a clinical diagnosis of anxiety. That doesn't even include the people that have it and have not sought help. So, chances are, if you are in a leadership role, there's someone on your team who may be experiencing this or experiencing it with their child.
How can sharing your personal story transform your brand and help manage anxiety? Today on Seek Go Create, we're joined by Dr. Robyn Graham, a business growth strategist and author of You, Me, and Anxiety. Robyn specializes in integrating personal narratives into branding, believing that authenticity not only enhances business success, but also helps in coping with anxiety. Listen in as we discuss how embracing your true self in your brand can lead to not just professional triumph, but also personal peace and resilience. Welcome. Welcome to Seek Go Create, Robyn.
Thank you, Tim. That was a very lovely introduction. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks. We've already kind of given the preface that might have a little cold here, so I'm going to ask for some forgiveness from the audience, but we're going to enjoy this conversation. Just finish reading your book, and you do business stuff and all like I do in some ways, so I'm sure it's unique. We'll talk about that. But before we really launch into all of that, Robyn, why don't you answer the question either what do you do or who are you? Pick it and go ahead and answer.
All right. That's a tough decision, and probably you're going to get an answer that's combined here. So, who am I? I am a child of God. I love Jesus, and I'm a mom of three, two adult children and one teenager. I have two dogs. I am an author, a speaker. I am working on my ACC credentials right now for solution focused and neuro focused neuroscience coaching. So I am a woman who has my hands in many, many pots, and they're always being stirred.
You ever feel like you have too much going on?
Yeah, this is one of those weeks where I feel like I'm on emotionally and sensory tired this week, where there's like all of that at one time. Usually managing energy is a really great gift that I have, but this week's been a little rough.
Well, I've already shared with you a little bit rough for my wife and I. In fact, one of the things that we really purpose to do is it when we're feeling a little bit puny, like we are right now with some little crud, we try not to make any big decisions. Like we were planning some travel and some things like that. We say, you know what? Let's don't make those decisions right now. This is not a good decision time. And that's not the way we're wired. We just want to keep powering through. So, someone would listen. And what's odd, let's go ahead and get pseudo controversial to start off with. It's very often that men can have this long list of stuff and people don't think much about it. But then when women do, they kind of start getting, oh, it seems like you got a lot going on. Do you feel like it's a good example to be that productive? Or at times, do you wonder if maybe there are people that look at you and can get intimidated? That's the way I'll ask it.
Oh, that's a really good question. And I think it's a combination of the two. I think it's very individual. I don't think we can judge what someone else gets done compared to what we get done. We're all multiple different people. We're wired differently. Some of us are very task oriented. Some of us are just thought, thought work is better for them versus the actual to do. And I know for me, I'm a big to do list check offer. And I pride myself in all that I can do. I'm also very good about making sure I get my sleep. I make sure I get my exercise. Those are things people don't see, right? Where we actually do nurture ourselves. And when you emphasize the things that are really important for your mind, body, and soul, people don't see that part. My devotions every morning or my Bible study every morning. That sets the tone of what I'm going to be able to do during the day. And so it is funny because I think people do look at other people and think, gosh, they get so much done and I get nothing done. But it's all how we use our time and it's all how we preserve our energy, right?
Yeah, and I see let's go ahead and we'll throw this into the mix. There are a lot of people that are streaming whatever shows on Netflix, and watching all episodes. They're watching every sport. We're recording this in March-ish, where there's about to be a bazillion college basketball games. And my guess is you're probably not sitting in front of television a good bit. Wife
No.
and I barely have it. And what's interesting at the age we're at, that I love that you brought this up because I think this might feed into success in business and also the conversation about anxiety, and that is the aspect of rest. Self-care is an odd word. I have to be careful with that. To me, it's more of just knowing, being aware of what you can and can't do and when you need to do it and
Mhm.
things like that. I think self-care may have been used in an odd way, but I do think it's important for us to understand that. I used to be one of these people, Robin, that was pretty prideful, and that's the right word to use, that I didn't sleep much at night and boasted about it. And that's the correct word to use too. Now, man, I'm loving when I could get me some good rest and sleep and I feel refreshed. And I'm a little bit off right now because I've been waking up in the middle of the night coughing some. I
Mhm.
feel a little fatigued, but I'm also trying not to pile on anything over the next few days until my body says, okay, we're a little bit better. How important, let's go ahead and kind of get into a little bit of the conversation about your book with anxiety, which I did read, by the way. I've got your book, You, Me, and Anxiety, and I've got some confessions that I'll make in just a second about it that might make it for a fun conversation. How important is what you just brought up related to that one item of anxiety, and that is the rest and taking care of yourself and knowing what you can and can't do?
It matters more than anyone can imagine. When we sleep, our body resets, our entire nervous system resets, and we need that. We're not meant to go, 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 go. And I learned at a very young age, I need sleep. Two of my sisters and my mom can go on very little sleep. My other sister and I, we need our sleep. And if we haven't gotten it, like everything about my nervous system is off if I don't get enough rest. And so, it's and I think there is this, time is finite, but energy is fluid. We can create more energy, but it's a matter of how we care for our mind, body, and spirit. And so if you're one of those people that is like an energizer bunny and can go, 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 that's great. But eventually you're not going to get enough time, but your energy might run out. So you have to ask yourself, okay, if I have this much time, and even if you were given 10 hours a day more and you had 34 hours in a day, would you be able to do everything that you want to do? And the answer is probably no, because you would run out of energy, right? So we have to balance those things. It's not time or energy. It's a matter of, okay, I have this much time. How can I manage my energy to do everything else I need to do and have solid relationships in the other 16 hours?
So, one thing you mentioned earlier that you were a task person, list maker, check things off. My wife is that way. If she does things, she will often, this is a little bit of a joke within our RV or house, she'll do something. And if it wasn't on the list, she'll put it on the list so she could check it off. That's slight exaggeration, but if she were sitting here with me, she would say, of course. I mean, because that's how I get my sense of accomplishment. One of the
I
things,
like your wife.
yeah, you would love Glory. And when you meet her, if you get an email from her on the bottom, it says, you have been glorified. So, anyway, one of the things that she and I discuss, this is related to sleep. This is kind of a little bit of a personal question about sleep. She will lay down at night and her list will continue to churn in her head, which makes it a little bit difficult at times to fall asleep initially. I'm pretty good at laying down and I'm out. Now, I might wake up 3, 4 a.m., whatever, and then I'll start thinking about a couple of things. But being a task person and talking about how important sleep is, do those 2 conflict with you at all with the way I just brought that up?
So I'm very much like your wife, but I
Okay.
keep a notebook by my bed so
Ah,
that
okay.
if I think of something, I can put that I don't have my phone by my bed, but I have a
Good,
notebook by my bed so
good.
that I can if something comes to mind as I'm falling asleep or if something comes to mind in the middle of the night, I can put it in that notebook versus getting up, so it helps me get back to sleep faster. They talk about sleep hygiene, and I try to follow all of that because sleep is so important to me, but I read before I go to bed, so that quiets my nervous system just enough that I can go to sleep, and
Right.
most nights stay asleep.
So do you read like an actual paper type book, or do you read from like a Kindle? You said you don't do your phone, which we've had discussions about that, and unfortunately, my wife will sometimes bring her phone because, we've got adult children, and sometimes she thinks, "I've gotta be available for them." 'em. I'm going, "You know what? If there's an emergency, they need to call 911. We'll be around in the morning." There's a little bit of that's a father versus mother probably conversation. But what are some other things? I mean, I think this whole sleep conversation, it was not on my notes anywhere, but I think it's vital to a lot of success. Uh,
Mhm.
Give me some of the other things that you do just for your sleep health. The list. People
Well
don't know I think I'm doing a good bit, but I'd love to hear what you're doing.
well, I have my nighttime routine, right? The whole wash the face, brush the teeth, or, all that stuff, of course, as anybody does, but it kinda starts where, I go upstairs and I'm done. When I go upstairs, everybody knows I'm done for the day, and sometimes it's a joke because I'll say, "Oh, I'm gonna go up and take a shower," and everybody is like, "Is she gonna do it? Or is she gonna be back?" And then I'm back, and then I'm back up, and then I'm back down because I think of things. So it's a joke in our house, but that's just how my brain works because it's always going. But what I like to do is my phone's put away at a certain time. I don't have social media apps on my phone, so I'm not tempted to go on them. I figure if by 7 o'clock at night, I'm done with work, nobody's emailing me. And if they are emailing me, it's going to wait till the next day. My clients know 9 to 5 is when they're going to get me. So it's setting those boundaries. My family all knows after 9 o'clock, don't call, don't text. I'm going to be getting ready for bed. Doesn't mean I'm in bed at that time, but I don't want to be on my device. I don't want things triggering additional to dos or whatever. And then when I get in bed, I do my journaling, I do my prayers and or a devotion, and then I read. And that's just my time to really close out my day. When I have my gratitude practice, which I think is an absolute necessity for me to look back on my day and find at least three things. Normally there's way more than that I sit and I write out. I thank God for everything that happened that day. Sometimes things weren't that great, but I learned a lesson. Sometimes things didn't get done, and I can say, yet. It's really putting the focus on the positive before I close my eyes and go to sleep.
There's 2 or 3 things that I love about what you just said there, and I'm glad I asked the question. One of the first things was not allowing other people's emergencies to spill over. Years ago, I used to be a coach in the real estate space where people would buy and sell properties, and some people would pay, and they paid a lot of money for me to be their coach. People would say, "Can I get your cell phone number?" This was right around the time smartphones were coming along. I said, "No, you don't need my cell phone. Email or, we've got a little forum and all that." They go, "But what if I have an emergency?" And this was my comment exactly. This is real estate. There are no emergencies in real estate. I'm sorry. If there's an emergency, you call 911. Well, what if I've got a deal or something? It'll wait till tomorrow. Oh, well, what if I don't get it? That's fine. We weren't supposed to get it. And so I love that you brought up, it's like, you know what? I'm shutting down. I don't need any of these emergencies. I like that. Another thing, and this is sort of I can't believe we're having this discussion about showering at night. And I'm not sure how appropriate this is, but I used to, I used to be like a morning shower person, but I've realized, and I track my sleep a little bit now. I do much better if I do a hot tub and or warm shower at night.
Mhm.
I sleep so much better. Sounds like that
Well,
might be your rhythm, correct?
it just completely relaxes me and sets me up for a good night's sleep. And then just everything from the day is gone. And it's just, I'm resetting for the next day. And I think it's important to do that.
Yeah.
And, when you talked about the emergency thing too, I mean, having had anxiety my entire life, it's like, there's always that concern. What if something happens? What if they can't reach me? If something did happen to my boys who are grown, what am I going to do? They don't live with me. So eventually I'm going to find out. If they need our advice, they contact us during the daytime. We usually have touch points, a text, or if we check in throughout the day, but I can't spend my entire adult life worrying about somebody needing me in the middle of the night. If it happens, it happens. But I'm up early, so there's not that many hours in
It's not
between.
like they're gonna miss that much. Between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m., then maybe people shouldn't have been doing that or something like that, but,
I just know my limits, and I know that to be
yeah.
the person that God's calling me to be, a good mom, a good
Yeah.
business person, and do all the things, I need my rest. So it's a priority. And I think when you talked earlier, you asked about the book and how important is that sleep is incredibly important for anyone who has anxiety. We all have a choice, right? You can have a diagnosis of anxiety. You can feel all of these feelings and experience all these emotions, and you can just continue down that path, or you can choose to adjust your lifestyle and adjust your habits so that they're healthy, and you can navigate it. So it becomes living with anxiety, or, having anxiety and suffering through it, to living with it, but managing it, navigating it, and loosening that rope of control that it's had around you.
And it kind of feeds into something that popped in my head just now, and that is, I love the structure that you're talking about in your life, and so my question related to that is, did you grow up with structure, or is it something that you have developed over time?
I mean, there were 4 of us. So my mom was a very young, as you know from reading the book, a
Mhm.
very young mom, and my dad worked a lot. So there were I would say we had some semblance of structure, like, dinner was at the same time every day. We, got up at whatever time to go to school and stuff like that. It wasn't a rigid structure, but probably just enough where my body and my brain liked routine. I've always been very habitual, very routine oriented. So I would say that I had exposure to that when I was young. And then as I got older, I just knew what I needed. And I've always adhered to that.
Right, and another thing I recall from reading your story in the book, there were some challenging times growing up, and
Hmm.
one of the things that I've observed is that many times chaos or disorder or some dysfunction
Hmm.
can impact our mental state and can impact obviously things
Hmm.
like anxiety and things like that.
Hmm.
I think I'll just leave it at that. What would you like to say about maybe how you were raised or some things from your story that fed into you dealing with this and working through this?
That's such a good question, and it's probably way deeper than the time we have here. But what I'll say is that when you grow up in a dysfunctional environment, and I had very loving parents, but there's something called epigenetics, and they will flow down. And no matter what you're doing and who you think you are, these things are all going to impact behaviors and choices. And mental health was something that was not discussed. It wasn't something you got treated for. And so all those factors tend to build, and that leads to a lack of stability. And when you have a genetic predisposition to anxiety, those emotional instabilities or that emotional chaos is going to lead to a lot of nervous system agitation, lack of ability to regulate yourself, and it just leads to seeking different things to try to control the environment that you can't control. So I would say that definitely has an impact. Absolutely 100% has an impact on how we behave, the choices we make, how we develop in relationships, all of that.
Yeah, and one of the things that I noticed in reading through the book, and this was probably one of the reasons why I wanted to have a chat with you is that I know you work with business people. We'll discuss that shortly because I'd love to know more about what you do there. But the book was something that intrigued me. I wonder at times if I don't have enough compassion for people that might have anxiety because most people that are around me would say that I don't have any of that. And maybe I do, maybe I don't. But that's probably not the way I'm wired. I
Mhm,
mean, there's some things that I read in the book and some other things like that. I'm going, I may have said, "Get over it," before, which in the book,
mhm,
which is actually not.
uh-huh.
What do people need to know about if we don't have that? We've got our own issues. There's probably other things that we could discuss, but if that's not something we deal with, what do we need to know?
So, it's such a great question. It's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. But first of all, Tim, you don't know what you don't know, right? In the book, I give an example of an incident we had with our son, and my husband had no idea how to deal with anxiety. I had lived with it my entire life. And so when we started to see that happening with our son, I was trying to help him in the way that I knew best because I had been in his shoes. I had experienced what he was experiencing. And my husband was like, just do it. And I'm like, you can't do that to him. It was this whole scene at the kitchen table. And it was at no fault of his. He did not know. And so, you may have said get over it. And trust me, I have kids with anxiety, so it's very easy to want to say that. Like just put your boots on and let's go. It doesn't work that way. And that is one of the reasons I wrote the book was because what's happening in our teen society is kids are being bullied every single day. They're being accused of being weird. People don't understand them. And when there's a lack of understanding, there's judgment, right? And so, I mean, to tell my story, like I have a really great life, but there were a lot of hiccups along the way, right? A lot of things I had to overcome and navigate. So it's not that I'm special in telling my story. When kids are struggling and people don't understand what they're struggling with, you can't help them. So if I can increase the awareness of anxiety, and now we hear a lot more about anxiety and a lot more about depression and mental health challenges than we ever have before, there are a lot of people out there who use it as an excuse. They use it as an excuse for poor behavior, poor choices, for lashing out at other people, for not respecting other people, for doing drugs or other things, right? Making unhealthy choices that affect other people and influence other people's lives in a negative way. So, when you say that, if you're dealing with someone who is using it as a crutch or an excuse to get their way or to not do things that they need to do or to not be a productive member of society, I can see where that frustration and lack of compassion would be, but only because I've done the work I've done. And when we talk about navigating anxiety, it is work, just like changing your mindset, just like, anything else that you want to accomplish that's going to meaningful in your life. It's work, it's action, it's doing something to move through it, to push yourself forward. It takes action to succeed, no matter what it is. And it's no different with mental health. Now, when I sat down to write the book, I wanted other teens to recognize this kid may be peculiar. You may not understand them, but give them the grace to get curious and try to get to know them because underneath these strange behaviors or this inability to talk to someone at school or this, need to kind of hide in a corner, that doesn't mean they're weird. It doesn't mean they don't have feelings. It doesn't mean that they're incapable of having a relationship. It means that they're wired a little bit differently. So instead of judging them and shunning them or bullying, get curious. And sometimes all it takes is a smile to change the course of a child or a teen's or adult's life. They could be wanting to end their life that day. And someone just showing they care can completely turn that around and change the outcome.
At what age did you become aware or You mentioned you've done a lot of work. Did you start doing the work or get help or whatever? What was your age when that occurred?
So the first time I got help was in college, and that was around an eating disorder. And then that was kind of, I think the only way I survived was because my mother and grandmother prayed all the time and my dad. But I never had true help, like really dedicated help until I was an adult. I got the help I needed as we were seeking the help my son needed. So way too long, way too long.
Mm.
I was in the medical profession. I should have known, I knew everything, but it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I actually had that first experience with therapy and understanding more about myself and my emotions. I learned a lot. I tried to navigate it all on my own, but that official help I got wasn't until I was in my, I don't even know how old I was, but I was an adult.
Later. It was later. It was
It was
a
later. It
couple
was
years
too later.
later. Yeah, we'll say a few years later.
It was
During
too later.
the interim, would you say you were managing it? Were you, as Tim said earlier, dealing with it? Were you ignoring it? How would you, because to me, it seems like that's probably where a lot of people are.
I would say that I was managing it
Mm,
most of the time,
mm,
but not all of the time. And it's those times when I wasn't managing it that I really wish I had been because, losing my mind, so to speak, and getting irritated and angry over stupid things was not cool. And, I could have hurt relationships doing that. Now, fortunately, I was relatively aware, relatively in control, but there are a lot of times where I could have had better conversations or I could have handled the situation differently. I have missed out on a lot in my life because I was too afraid to step into it, too focused on the what ifs versus this could be great if I just gave it a chance. So I would say to anyone who thinks that there may be something off, it is 1000% worth just seeing a therapist, talking to your doctor, ask questions, read the book just to understand what happens. Because what happens a lot of times is people live with certain symptoms for their entire life. And they're like, I don't know why I'm the way I am. I hate the way I am. This is so stupid. And they develop guilt and shame and all these things when the reality is it's a chemical imbalance in the brain, or there's a neural pathway that just keeps firing in a negative way, like a Ferris wheel. You have the Ferris wheel and it's going round and round and round, and it slows down to let people off and let new people on. Our brain gets so in these tracks of this spinning cycle that it just keeps going faster and faster and faster. So there's no time to let the negative thoughts off and positive thoughts come in. And that's where we have to start to recognize, okay, it's not, and I'm going to use air quotes for normal for anyone who's not watching, but listening, and recognizing that and then actually doing the work to say, okay, nobody else is thinking this way about me.
mm.
Nobody else is thinking this way about this situation. It's probably not as bad as what I'm thinking it is. So, how can I change that thought or really be in tune to my body and what's happening, what I'm feeling, and what's building up as these thoughts are occurring? And where can I take a step back and try to rewire those neural pathways in my brain, reroute them to be able to navigate that?
Right. You mentioned earlier, you said something about your husband, and there was a highlight that I have. I've got your book here. On page 70, this is said having and maintaining relationships might be the most challenging part of life for people with anxiety. And I'm guessing from the way you've talked and have children and all that, that you and John have probably, like most couples, gone through stuff, but yet still here you are. Tell me more about the challenge with relationships and anxiety.
Sure. So when a person has anxiety, oftentimes they don't trust. So if they don't trust, that can be, and I've always trusted my husband. That hasn't been necessarily like a bad thing in our relationship. However, that lack of trust leads to hypersensitivity, a lack of confidence in self. So you become hypersensitive, right? To wait, did they say that? Well, what does that mean? And instead of asking, you react, right? So it's not just absorbing, it's not just considering, it's a lot of the times it's reactionary or accusatory, things like that. I mean, fortunately, my husband's been pretty great, so I don't have a lot of complaints there, but there have been times where it's like, no, like, I just have to say, like, you can't say that to me. Like, that doesn't sit well with me because of XYZ. So I've had to explain. And for years, I didn't explain. And for years, we just kind of went through the motions. But when I wrote my book and he read my book, he was like, I had no idea. Like, he
Mm.
had no idea about any of that because who's going to talk about that? What's wrong with them? We just want to hide it and pretend it doesn't happen. But this is why it's so important to understand if someone has anxiety or depression, it doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean they're broken. It just means that they're going to process the information differently. And so when you have someone that is constantly on guard, they're living in fear, they don't feel safe, and not because anyone's harming them, it's just what their brain is telling them. Their sympathetic nervous system is on overdrive all the time, which is there to protect us, but we don't need it to protect us, but it doesn't realize that. So you're living pent up and all this energy. The second somebody says something that could be questionable or whatever, you react and it makes it hard, right? And it makes it hard to also put yourself out there to be vulnerable in relationships. And if we're not willing and able to be vulnerable in our relationships, you don't really get to know the other person. And so there's just a lot of things that are prevented in terms of developing strong relationships when you're living with, well, what if, or, for example, like this is so many people I talk to who have experienced anxiety. It's, you go somewhere like out to dinner with friends or whatever. And instead of it being like, oh my gosh, that was so fun, it's, did I say anything wrong? Are they talking about me? What if I said that and they didn't like what I said? Maybe they're talking about me behind my back. Maybe they didn't have fun. And it's just this cycle of thoughts. So when I say it takes action, right, over anxiety, it's literally catching those thoughts and saying, Robyn, you didn't say anything bad. They love you. They adore you. They laughed with you, not you. We already set a date for a new plan. It's like, you know, really taking that active intention to change how you're thinking about a situation and letting yourself know it's okay. You're safe.
So one thing, this is what kept popping to my mind. This will tell you where I'm at. I kept thinking about how some of those things just never come to my mind. And I was wondering if they do with your husband. Have y'all talked about this?
No,
Like if y'all go out to
no,
dinner with a couple, is he sitting here going, "Man, I hope I'm wearing the right outfit"? Is that even go through his mind at all? No.
nope, nope,
And it
not at all. But let me tell you something. There are so many different types of anxiety, so many different levels of anxiety. So you can have general anxiety disorder, you can have social anxiety disorder. There's all different kinds of anxiety. I was an unlucky one because I've got multiple, but every single person is different. Something that would bother me might not ever bother my husband, but there may be things that would bother him. Maybe from a professional perspective, he doesn't really have anxiety and he'll tell you that.
I think he
It's,
he and I would get along famously. My wife's like, "You never even thought about that you may have messed up or did something there." I said, "No, it never crossed my mind." And
mm-mm, mm-mm.
and I also wonder, this is like one other this is me digging a little bit to see if I can understand something better. Does it cause a possible conflict, might be the right word, if someone does come across as being fairly confident, let's don't use the word arrogant, but they say things with definitive tone as if they sort of know it all. You can tell I've
Mhm.
never done this, can't you? And what does that do for someone who might be on that end of the scale that you're talking about that have anxiety? To me, it seems like it's probably not helping. It's probably irritating the situation. But tell me what your thoughts are.
Absolutely. I mean, you're talking about somebody. who is going to evaluate. And I shouldn't say for everyone, because every single person is unique and every single person handles everything differently, right? And perceives differently. And their nervous system may be activated, may not be activated. So it's, this is all very non-specific and generalized, right? Because that's just how we have to approach it. But someone who does have generalized anxiety disorder or even social anxiety, where you're in a situation and somebody is, talks in a put off kind of way or seems to be holier than thou, so to speak, their ego is clearly present and they're very prideful. It can be a turnoff. It can be, yeah, I don't feel comfortable with that person. I feel like they're judging me or they think they're better than me, or, it can trigger those, gosh, I could never be like that thoughts. So, yeah, I think there's always an opportunity for someone's attitude to impact someone else. But I think for someone that has a clinical diagnosis of anxiety or is experiencing anxiety, that it's going to make it worse for sure.
Right. So, what was your spiritual life growing up? Because there's a scripture you bring up here, Philippians 4:6-7. I think this is one of my wife's, like, I don't want to say life verses, but I think this is one of her foundational verses. Is do not be anxious about anything. And tell me a little bit about your spiritual upbringing, and then what that scripture means to you as someone who might be anxious about things from time to time.
Yeah, well, that one's on repeat, right? And it's one that I reference a lot. But so I grew up, um, I mean, obviously in church, but it was like fear and guilt driven, if that's the right phrase. Like, you had to do this and you had to be a good Christian and you had to do this or you were going to hell. And if you were lukewarm, you were going to be spit out. So it wasn't until my adult years, and not all that many years ago, that I really developed that relationship and discovered how powerful the Holy Spirit is in me. And part of that was when I was writing my book. I was like, how did I come up with that? Did I didn't write that. That was like the Holy Spirit was right there. So, which I know sounds kind of crazy to people that aren't really, I don't know, it sounds kind of crazy. But anyway, so yeah, it wasn't until I was well into my adult years that I really understood. And it was just me out of necessity seeking that peace, the hope, and really diving into, studying the Bible, memorizing scripture, learning like what it really was that Jesus was asking for, and letting him be at the center of my life and welcoming him in for conversation, because doing it on my own wasn't working. So, it really was just learning how to have that relationship. I always knew Jesus, I always had faith, but it wasn't what it is.
Right. It's still part of the journey. My wife and I were just talking this morning. We're in our 60s now, and we have actually just learned some things from a spiritual standpoint. And we've been studying and all for 30, 40 years. And we're going, the more we learn, the more we realize we don't know stuff, and we're just continuing to
Yeah.
work on things. I,
Yeah.
you know, I, I feel like you would probably admit this. We're not definitely presenting to anyone we've got it figured out.
No,
But
not at all.
I want to shift just a little bit here. I'm trying to watch my time. I really want to get into some business conversation. One of the things that I have a theory about is that since, let's go back close to 10 years, we put a timestamp on this. We're recording this in 2025, and let's go back 10 years. I could list out some things that were going on politically here in the United States. We could go a few years beyond that and talk about COVID and other things like that. I believe that there have been, if there was some anxiousness that people have had, I believe that there has been some gasoline that's been poured onto that fire from our culture, society, our environment. And I'll throw one more thing in, and I'm just going to pause and let you talk about this. I believe that social media has amplified that to the nth degree. And I believe that there's some people that probably didn't feel as if they suffered with anxiety, that now they realize they probably do. All you have to do is just look at some of the political discourse and things like that. So when I bring that up, what comes to mind?
So, so many things. I need to take a deep breath.
Let's be calm. Let's be at peace.
Yeah. So, anytime there is change, someone who has anxiety may be triggered. People who may never have had anxiety may develop anxiety or anxious tendencies because there are a lot of unknowns. When you think about fear, anxiety and fear go hand in hand. And this is why I mentioned earlier, a gratitude practice is so crucial because we cannot be anxious and grateful at the same time. It is absolutely imperative that we offset some of that anxiety looking at all of the good things that we have in our life. What's happening in our society today and social media and media in general is amplifying mental health challenges because people don't know who to trust. People don't know what's real, what's not real. People are spewing messages of hate out of fear, strictly out of fear, because they don't understand someone else. They don't understand why decisions are being made. And so instead of trying to learn and research, they're going straight to what they think they know about a person or a policy or whatever. And they immediately go into, well, everybody should be thinking like me. And if they're not thinking like me, they're an idiot. And so I'm going to tell the world about it. And nobody knows this, but I found this and I'm going to tell everybody. And they're these most outrageous, ridiculous things that are not factual. They have not been validated, or they're so slanted one way or another that it's just causing all of this exaggeration. And it really breaks my heart because a lot of these people are really nice people and they're putting stuff out as fear tactics. And all of that does is hurt other people. It does not help their cause. It does not make people see like they see. And so relationships are being pulled apart. And the more people that are anxious and fearful, the less positive and effective decision making that's going to happen, the less we're going to be able to move forward as a country or a world.
Yeah, man, there's so much there. I don't see a lot of what I would call woman at the well, Jesus conversation with the woman at the well that was
No,
just laced with
no.
love and compassion. And I see a lot of vitriol, and I see some leaders in the political arena that are probably speaking things in that boldness might be a word that some people would use. Some people might use the word arrogance or whatever. And that's not really even an indictment on one side or the other. We have a
Yeah,
current leader in
yeah.
the U.S. that is pretty strong when he speaks, and I
Mhm,
could see how that could possibly have some issues for people. But I think it helps to have an awareness of it. And I've shared this before, but one of the things that I did a little over a year ago, right before I turned 60, is that I cut out two things the month before I turned 60. I decided to have no alcohol for the month. I don't drink that much anyway, but I just said, let me just see what it does. And then I decided to fast or get rid of all the sources of information that I had coming in. News, I felt like I needed in my business to read certain things and read from the far left, the far right, the middle. And what's interesting, after the month, I realized that alcohol was not a big deal one way or the other. I could take it or leave it, didn't matter. I was going through
mhm,
detox by getting rid of all that information, though. It was just really amazing to me. It was, I think, the month that Israel began whatever they were doing in Gaza and all this kind of weird stuff. And
mhm,
I was like going, wow. But you know what? When I've cleared up my head from that, I haven't gone back or anything like that. I've started writing more books. I've started doing some more creative things. It's opened up a lot of things spiritually.
mhm.
I just think we're better and haven't missed anything. I still know everything that's going on.
Of course, right? Because it's everywhere. You cannot escape it. But here's the thing, Tim. It's really about, and I have a chapter in the book all about this, about curiosity, because what's happening is people are going straight to judgment versus getting curious to learn. And the second we lose curiosity, the second we don't focus on getting to know other people and valuing their opinion, even if it's different than our own, we lose the concept of healthy relationships.
Mhm. Got a couple other things about the book, but I think before I do that, I think I'd like to ask at what point and how did you move from what was your doctorate in? Pharmacy? Is that correct?
Pharmacy.
So,
Yeah.
how'd you move from pharmacy into coaching, business growth, and strategy?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So when I was in pharmacy, I was not a traditional pharmacist. I either worked in the clinical setting or I worked in corporate. So in marketing, always in marketing. And so I was already a strategic person. I was already creative. And so those things kind of came naturally for me. And I had built a medical writing and consulting business that was very successful and all through relationship marketing. Back then, there wasn't SEO, there wasn't social media, it was all relationship marketing. And so I had grown that business. Well, then when my boys were they were like upper middle school ages and my daughter was still a toddler, our nanny got sick and I was working part-time, but I was working for myself. Even if you're only working 30 hours a week, that's a lot when your husband travels 50% of the time. You have no family where you live and you're doing it all. And that so I lost my only source of like real help. And then our son was showing signs and symptoms of anxiety. And I was like, my husband and I talked about it and we're like, we can't keep up this pace or our family's not going to be healthy and survive. So he's like, you love photography, do something with it. And I was like, what? He goes, yeah, do something with your photography. I see you when you do it, you light up. And it had been a hobby my whole entire life. And it really did ease my anxiety. It really did help me using that as a creative outlet. So I started a blog, and within 6 weeks, I had my first paying client, which was a branding client. And I did all of her photography for her website, her CD cover. She was an artist, a musician, and entertainer. And that was it. I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. So I did that for 11 years, headshots and branding, photography. And then towards the end of that 11 years, I saw women did not know how to build a foundation for their business. They didn't know. I was very strategically creating these images for them to use. They didn't know what to do with it. So then I started consulting in that way. And then I got a certification in branding and became a brand specialist. And then that just led one thing to another. I learned so much and I created like a mini agency type environment where I had a website designer, I had a copywriter, I had a social media expert, I had a videographer, and then I did the photography and did the coaching around building the foundation for your business. And so that's how I got to where I am today. And I, yeah, I wrote the book. And when I wrote the book, I was like, well, I've got the podcast, the book, the photography, I'm like, I can't do all this. So I let the photography go, sold my studio to a photographer that had been working with me and yeah, and when I wrote the book, I felt God saying to me, I want you to do something for moms and teen girls. Well, when he calls you to something, you should do it because here I am 3 years later and I'm like, okay, so I'm working on more certification, I'm getting ACC credential, and a lot of things are going to kind of pivot soon.
So are we gonna is the announcement here, or is it something that you're moving in a
It's to
direction, or what?
come. It's to come. We're still mapping that out. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've built a really good thing with my business and I love what I do. So, I don't know that that's going away, but I think there will be some shifts and additions.
How does the work you've done with anxiety spill over into the work you do with business growth and strategy? And then how does it
It's
contrast? Does it cause any conflict at all?
No, I would say it does not cause any conflict whatsoever, but what it has done is given me the gift to be able to help more people because a lot of women are they're because of social media and a lot innately are they get sucked into comparison, imposter syndrome, doubt, fear, and all of those negative emotions. And so we have to do a lot of mindset work. And it really is being able to coach them through that and discovering, okay, is this real? Is this not real? And how can I really access, the gifts that I have and my identity in Christ? And so all of that becomes a very important part of everything I do because people can't show up authentically if they don't understand themselves and what is making their nervous system churn.
Right. Yeah, I actually could see it could be a good fit. One of the things I thought of as I was reading through the book, I was just kind of going, okay, as a leader, you're a leader over 20 people, let's say. The chances of someone I know you wrote specifically for parents. However, in my mind, I'm sitting here going, what can I understand about this from being leader of an organization? And so I thought it was helpful. I want to tell you the thing that my personality enjoyed the most, as if my personality really matters. But what what I
Of course
enjoyed,
it does.
I was going through and I was feeling a little bit, I don't want to say down, but you were identifying the issues with anxiety. And then there was a chapter titled Laughter. And I went, oh, well, things just changed a little bit. The next chapter was kindness. The next chapter is apologies. The next chapter, I mean, you can see I've got them all turned down here. The next chapter is trust. And I'm sitting here going, okay, she just kind of wrote fate. She just all of a sudden wrote something that is for everyone that we all need this type stuff. But there
Mhm.
was one other one I can't comparison. I think that's when I got into social media. So I enjoyed it. The book is You, Me, and Anxiety. Take action over anxiety to enjoy being you. And I think it's valuable for someone who either is going through it, like you said, or they're a parent. I also think it has some applications for people in a leadership role. I've got an
Mhm.
organization that kind of oversee to some extent, and I'm sitting here going, what are the chances that there's someone in that organization that deals with this? And I don't know exactly
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
I would do. I don't think I would say get over it anymore. So if nothing else, maybe you've achieved and accomplished things there. But tell people, Robyn, I've got a couple other things and I'm going to wrap up with something that I think is very important from you. But
Mhm.
tell people how they could connect with you. Tell them the type people that maybe should do this from the Business Growth Strategist if you want to send them there. Who needs to get the book and where they could go? I'm sure it's Amazon and all that. But just go ahead and tell all of that. We'll include it down in the notes.
Sure, absolutely, Tim. Thank you for that opportunity. The best place to find me is on my website, therobyngraham.com. It's Robyn with a Y and Graham just like the cracker, therobyngraham.com. You can find the book there, the podcast there, the blog there. There is just a plethora of information as well as free resources. And on the resource page, therobyngraham.com/resources, there's actually a free ebook that talks about developing healthy habits to be able to navigate anxiety and have a healthy, purposeful life. So I do encourage you to download that if you have experienced anxiety or if you know someone who has. And as far, Tim, as leaders go, I just want to encourage there are so many things about mental health that can impact how a person performs, what their quality of work is, what their quantity of work is, how they interact and with the team, how they either produce or bring a team down. So it really is important that we have this conversation. Well over 50% of people in the United States have anxiety, a clinical diagnosis of anxiety. That doesn't even include the people that have it and have not sought help. So, chances are, if you are in a leadership role, there's someone on your team who may be experiencing this or experiencing it with their child.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate you saying that because that was part of one of the questions I was going to ask is speak to the leaders. The other question I want to ask, this will be my final question before I wrap up, is I believe it would be really great for you to give a word of encouragement to someone who may have been listening in and they've said, oh, that sounds like me. Just if someone's been listening in, they saw the title and it had anxiety in the title, to give them some uplifting, whatever the Holy Spirit puts on your heart, to take a minute or so and share.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the very first thing that I want to say is you're not alone. There are many other people who are suffering alongside you. And I will be praying for everyone who is listening. If you feel that this describes you and you might have anxiety, please seek help. There is nothing shameful whatsoever about having a mental health diagnosis. So I encourage you to ask your physician, ask a friend, a neighbor, someone to recommend a therapist to you, because the more we are aware of any mental health challenges, the better we're going to be able to navigate them, the better quality of life we're going to have, and the better quality of life our family is going to have, and the deeper our relationships will become. And we all need each other. This isn't something you do in a silo.
Thank you, Robyn. Robyn Graham, I appreciate you being a guest. I appreciate you writing the book. You, Me, and Anxiety. Take action over anxiety to enjoy being you. Grab a copy of this. I appreciate you joining us here on Seek, Go, Create. I appreciate y'all listening in. I think this has been an important conversation. Take some action. Don't be passive. If you're being nudged, do something. And we have new episodes here every Monday. We're on YouTube. We're on all the podcast platforms. Keep writing comments. Keep sharing all the things that you're doing. We appreciate it greatly. And we will see you next week on Seek, Go, Create.